quiet town where the shadows play, there's a little bookshop tucked away. During the day he wears a human face, the wolf from the lore in a cozy space. Dusty tomes line the shelves with care, each story whispers secrets almost like a prayer. With every page turned, a world comes alive. In the heart of this wolf is where dreams thrive. Oh, he howls at the moon when the night draws near, shedding his skin, no more need for fear. In his library deep, where the stories unfold, he speaks of magic, of legends untold. When the sun goes down and the stars ignite, he drops the disguise and sighs with delight. Downstairs in his lair, in the warm glowing light, he gathers his friends for tales of the night. With a cup of tea and a heart full of glee, he weaves the enchantment, sets their spirits free. From princes and dragons to wishes and dreams, he breathes life into stories, or so it seems. Oh, he howls at the moon when the night draws near, shedding his skin, no more need for fear. In his library deep, where the stories unfold, he speaks of magic, of legends untold. On Friday night, the lanterns glow.
Hello everyone! It's Friday night, and you know what that means. That means we're going to do some fairy tales. I hope you all had a really good week, and as this is the last day of the month, has anyone gone outside to look at the sky? Because there should be 7 visible planets out there. I mean, we can't really see Mercury at night because it's, well, up against the sun. But yeah, I went out earlier and I stood around with my dad and looked at the planets, and it was really kind of interesting. But seeing as the planets are all out, it just seems like it would be a magical evening, right? Oh, my cat cam is having issues. Not that there's a cat there, because they're all in the hallway instead of inside here with me. I'm going to do a quick sound check thing, make sure things work. Okay, well, blurp is working. That's blurp. Where is the sound alert? Oh, that's blurp. That's also blurp. I think I use more blurp things than I do sound alerts. I know this one's one because I had to upload it. Hello? Okay. That one is also working. That's good to know. There's a Duosian in the chat. I don't know what a Duosian is, but if you would like to capture it, it is there. I'm going to do something. I'm going to try something real quick. Go to my bookstore. No. My dashboard. Oh, cool. I have somehow managed to earn $12. That is quite cool. But I need to go to my book listing and just go ahead and view my shop. Do I have... No, I don't. I need to add all the fairy books to my Reddit on stream. Honestly, I need to update a lot of them. Because, oddly enough, we only have possibly 2 more weeks left of the Gray Fairy book. That's honestly amazing. Okay, I'm going to... No, I don't want to add it to my wish list. I'm going to add it to my affiliate link. Yeah, that one. Where is it? Storyteller Live, okay. It's still amazing to me that I've read so many fairy tales now. I mean, it shouldn't be, because, you know, I've been the one reading them. I'm gonna have to save that one. The Princess Nobody. Let's see. Oh, anyway, I'm just adding things to my bookstore on... But yeah, my online bookstore, bookshop.org, at Grey Wolf, Rare and Magical Books, because, well, that's where we are right now, technically. But I've been trying to... I need to go through and find copies of all the books that I've read and add them to a list I have on there. Because right now... Let me get this one. Okay. Is there a hardback copy? Yeah, there's that one. Okay, well, there's literally the hardback I'm reading right now. That's on back order. I will add it to my list anyway. But get to the right one. This. I'm going to pin the book that I'm reading. If it will let me. Yes. It's not letting me. Because reasons. So I will ask Kel if she can do it. Apparently Kel can't either. Well, that is weird. Why will it not let me pin messages? Well, let me pin on this version. And it's not letting me... How can it not let me pen through anything? That is just so freaking awkward. Let me try one more way. Pen. Yes. Pen. Yes. Let's see. No, it's not letting me pen messages. Well, that is just stupid. Anyway, we are reading fairy tales tonight from the Gray Fairy book, which is what I have tagged under the currently reading post I put up. Or, if you want to see it, it would be this book. Admittedly, I do not have this copy of the book, because this copy of the book would be a few $100s more than I have. I would love to have a copy of the original print, but since the original print is from the end of the 19th century, I don't think I'd be able to get my hands on it. Well, honestly, I probably could, but it would be difficult for me to maintain. But since I have rambled over the 9-10 usual starting point for me reading, I'm going to hydrate, and I will get into the first story. And our first story for tonight is from Poland. The Unlooked-for Prince. A long time ago, there lived a king and a queen who had no children, although they both wished very much for a little son. They tried not to let each other see how unhappy they were, and pretended to take pleasure in hunting and hawking and all other sports. But at length the king could bear it no longer, and declared that he must go and visit the furthest corners of his kingdom, and that it would be many months before he should return to his capital. By that time he hoped he would have so many things to think about that he would have forgotten the trouble about the little son who never came. The country the king reigned over was very large and full of high, stony mountains and sandy deserts, so that it was not at all easy to go from one place to another. One day the king had wandered alone, meaning to go only a little distance, but everything looked so alike he could not make out the path by which he had come. He walked on and on for hours, the sun beating hotly on his head, and his legs trembling under him, and he might have died of thirst if he had not suddenly stumbled on a little well, which looked as if it had been newly dug. On the surface floated a silver cup with a golden handle, but as it bobbed about wherever the king tried to seize it, he was too thirsty to wait any longer, and knelt down and drank his fill. When he had finished, he began to rise to his knees, but somehow his beard seemed to have stuck fast in the water, and with all his efforts he could not pull it out. After 2 or 3 jerks to the head, which only hurt him without doing any good, he called out angrily, "Let go at once! Who is holding me?" "It is I, the King Castieri," said a voice from the well, and looking up through the water was a little man with green eyes and a big head.
"You have drunk from my spring, and I shall not let go until you promise to give me the most precious thing in your palace contains, which was not there when you left it."
Now, the only thing that the king much cared for in his palace was the queen herself, and when he had ridden away, he knew that Castell's were on. Let me try that again. Now, the only thing that the king much cared for in his palace was the queen herself, and as she was weeping bitterly on a pile of cushions in the great hall when he had ridden away, he knew that Castell's words could not apply to her. So he cheerfully gave the promise asked for by the ugly little man, and in a twinkling of an eye, man, spring, and cup had all disappeared, and the king was left kneeling on the dry sand, wondering if it was all just a dream. But as he felt much stronger and better, he made up his mind that the strange adventure must really have happened, and he sprang on his horse and rode off with a light heart to look for his companions. In a few weeks they began to set out on their return home, which they reached one hot day, 8 months after they had all left. The king was greatly beloved by his people, and crowds lined the roads, shouting and waving their hats at the procession as it passed by. On the steps of the palace stood the queen, with a splendid golden cushion in her arms, and on the cushion the most beautiful boy that was ever seen, wrapped about in a cloud of lace. In a moment, Castell's words rushed into the king's mind, and he began to weep bitterly, to the surprise of everyone, who had expected him nearly to die of joy at the sight of his son. But try as he would, and work as hard as he might, he could never forget his promise, and every time he let the baby out of his sight, he thought that he had seen it for the last time. However, years passed on, and the prince grew into a big boy, and then into a fine young man. Castell made no sign, and gradually even the anxious king thought less and less about him, and in the end forgot all about him altogether. There was no family in the whole kingdom happier than the king and queen and the prince, until one day the youth met a little old man as he was hunting in a lonely part of the woods.
"How are you, my unlooked-for prince?" he said. "You kept them waiting a good long time."
"And who are you?" asked the prince.
"You will know soon enough. When you go home, give my compliments to your father, and tell him that I wish he would square accounts with me. If he neglects to pay his debts, he will bitterly repent it."
So saying, the old man disappeared, and the prince returned to the palace and told his father what had happened. The king turned pale and explained to his son the terrible story. "Do not grieve over it, father," answered the prince. "It is nothing so dreadful after all. I will find some way to force Castell to give up his rights to me. But if I do not come back in a year's time, you must give up all hopes for ever seeing me." Then the prince began to journey, and his father gave him a complete suit of steel armor, a sword, a horse, and while his mother hung around his neck a cross of gold. So, kissing him tenderly with many tears, they let him go. He rode steadily on for 3 days, and at sunset on the 4th day he found himself on the seashore. On the sand before him lay 12 white dresses, dazzling as snow, Yet, as far as his eyes could reach, there was no one in sight to whom they could belong. Curious to see what would happen, he took up one of the garments, and leaving his horse loose to wander about the adjoining fields, he hid himself among some willows and waited. In a few minutes, a flock of geese which had been paddling about in the sea approached the shore, and put on the dresses, struck the sand with their feet, and were transformed into a twinkling of an eye into 11 beautiful young girls, who flew away as fast as they could. The 12th and youngest remained in the water, stretching out her long white neck and looking about her anxiously. Suddenly, among the willows, she perceived the king's son, and called out to him, with a human voice,
"Oh, Prince, give me back my dress. I shall be forever grateful to you."
The prince hastened to lay the dress in the sand, and walked away. When the maiden had thrown off the goose-skin and quickly put on her proper clothes, she came towards him, and he saw that none had ever seen or told of such beauty as hers. She blushed and held out her hand, saying to him in a soft voice,
"I thank you, noble prince, for having granted my request. I am the youngest daughter of Castile the Immortal, who has 12 daughters and rules over the kingdoms under the earth. Long time my father has waited for you, and great is his anger. But trouble yourself and fear nothing. Only do as I bid you. When you see the King Castile, fall straightway upon your knees and heed neither his threats nor his cry, but draw near him boldly. That which will happen after, you will know in time. Now, let us go."
At these words she struck the ground with her foot, and a gulf opened down which they went right into the heart of the earth. In a short time they reached Castile's palace, which gives light, with a light brighter than the sun, to the dark kingdoms below. And the prince, as he had been, entered boldly into the hall. Castile, with a shining crown upon his head, sat in the center upon a golden throne. His green eyes glittered like glass, his hands were like the claws of a crab. When he caught sight of the prince, he uttered piercing yells which shook the walls of the palace. The prince took no notice, but continued his advance on his knees towards the throne. When he had almost reached it, the king broke out into a laugh and said,
"It is very lucky for you that you have been able to make me laugh. Stay with us in our underground empire. Only first, you will have to do 3 things. Tonight it is late. Go to sleep. Tomorrow I will find you."
Early the following morning the prince received a message that Castile was ready to see him. He got up and dressed, and hastened to the presence chamber, where the little king was seated on his throne. When the prince appeared, bowing low before him, Castile began.
"Now, Prince, this is what you have to do. By tonight you must build me a marble palace with windows of crystal and a roof of gold. It is to stand in the middle of a great park full of streams and lakes. If you are able to build it, you shall be my friend. If not, off with your head."
The prince listened in silence to this startling speech, and then returning to his room, he set himself to think about certain death that awaited him. He was quite absorbed in these thoughts when suddenly a bee flew against the window and tapped, saying,
"Let me come in."
He rose and opened the window, and there stood before him the youngest princess.
"What are you dreaming about, Prince?"
"I was dreaming of your father, who has planned my death."
"Fear nothing. You may sleep in peace, and tomorrow morning when you awake, you will find the palace all ready."
What she said, she did. The next morning, when the prince left his room, he saw before him a palace more beautiful than his fancy had ever pictured. Castaigne, for his part, could hardly believe his eyes, and pondered deeply how it had gotten there.
"Well, this time you have certainly won, but you are not going to be let off so easily. Tomorrow all my 12 daughters shall stand before you in a row, and if you cannot tell me which of them is the youngest, off goes with your head."
"What? Not recognize the youngest princess," said the prince to himself as he entered the room. "A likely story."
"It is such a difficult matter that you will never be able to do it without my help,"
replied the bee, who was buzzing about the ceiling.
"We are all exactly alike, that even our father scarcely knows the difference between us."
"Then what must I do?"
"This. The youngest is she who will have a ladybird on her eyelid. Very careful. Now goodbye."
The next morning, King Castaigne sent for the prince. The young princesses were all drawn up in a row, dressed precisely in the same manner, and with their eyes all cast down. As the prince looked at them, he was amazed at their likeness. Twice he walked along the line without being able to detect a sign agreed upon. The third time his heart beat fast at the sight of a tiny speck upon the eyelid of one of the girls. "This one is the youngest," he said.
"Ha! How in the world did you guess?" cried Crossstone in a fury. "There is some jugglery about it, but you are not going to escape me so easily. In 3 hours you shall come here and give me another proof of your cleverness. I shall set alight a handful of straw, and before it is burnt up, you will have turned it into a pair of boots. If not, off goes your head."
So the prince returned sadly to his room, but the bee was there before him.
"Why do you look so melancholy, my handsome prince?"
"How can I help looking melancholy when your father has ordered me to make him a pair of boots? Does he take me for a shoemaker?"
"What do you think of doing?"
"Not making boots at any rate. I'm not afraid of death. One can only die once after all."
"No, prince, you shall not die. I will try to save you, and we will fly together or die together."
As she spoke, she spat upon the ground, and then, drawing the prince after her out of the room, she locked the door behind her and threw away the key. Holding each other tight by the hand, they made their way up to the sunlight and found themselves by the side of the same sea, while the prince's horse was still quite freely feeding in the neighboring meadow. The moment he saw his master, the horse whinnied and galloped towards him. Without losing an instant, the prince sprang into the saddle, swung the princess behind him, and away they went like an arrow from a bow. When the hour arrived which Castaigne had fixed the prince's last trial, and there was no sign of him, the king sent to his room to ask why he delayed so long. The servants, finding the door locked, knocked loudly and received for answer, "In a moment." It was a spittle, which was imitating the voice of the prince. The answer was taken back to Castaigne. He waited. Still no prince. He sent the servants back again, and the same voice replied, "Immediately."
"He is making fun of me," shrieked Costa in a rage. "Break in the door and bring him to me."
The servants hurried to do his bidding. The door was broken open. Nobody was inside, but just the spittle and fits of laughter. Castaigne was beside himself with rage and commanded his guards to ride for the fugitives. If the guards returned without the fugitives, their heads should pay for it. By this time, the prince and princess had got a good start and were feeling quite happy when suddenly they heard the sound of a gallop far behind them. The prince sprang from the saddle and laid his ear on the ground. "They are pursuing us," he said.
"There is no time to be lost,"
answered the princess as she spoke. She changed herself into a river, and the prince into a bridge, and the horse into a crow, and divided the wide road beyond the bridge into 3 little ones. When the soldiers came up to the bridge, they paused uncertainly. How were they to know which of the 3 roads the fugitives had taken? They gave it up in despair and returned, trembling, to Kastai.
"Idiots!" he exclaimed in a passion. "They were the bridge, the river, and the course. Do you mean to say you never thought of that? Go back at once!"
And they galloped like lightning. But time had been lost, and the prince and princess were far on their way.
"I hear a horse!"
cried the princess. The prince jumped down and laid his ear on the ground. "Yes," he said, "they're not far off now." In an instant, prince, princess, and horse had all disappeared, and instead was a dense forest crossed and recrossed by countless paths. Kastai's soldiers dashed hastily into the forest, believing they saw before them the flying horse with its burden doubled. They seemed close upon them when suddenly horse, wood, and everything disappeared, and they found themselves at the place where they had started. There was nothing for it but to return to Kastai and tell him this fresh disaster.
A horse, cried the king. "I will go find him myself. This time they shall not escape."
And he galloped off, foaming with anger.
"I think I hear someone pursuing us,"
said the princess. "Yes, so do I."
"This time it is Kastai himself, but his power only reaches as far as the first church, and he can go no further. Give me your golden cross so the prince
unfastened the cross which his mother gave him, and the princess hastily changed herself into a church, the prince into a priest, and the horse into a belfry. It was hardly done when Kastai came up.
"Greetings, monk. Have you seen some travelers on horseback pass this way?"
"Yes. The prince and Kastai's daughter have just gone by. They have entered the church and told me to give you their greetings if I met you." Then Kastai knew that he was hopelessly beaten, and the prince and princess continued their journey without any more adventures. Thank you for the heart rate. And oddly enough, I'm not drinking alcohol tonight. Just coffee. How many stories are left in this one? Let's see, that was Unlooked-for Prince. There are only 8 more stories left in this book. So let's continue and see how far I can make it into this next one. There's a wild mantine in chat. And it's still letting me pin my posts. That's craziness. Anyway. Our next story for this fabulous Friday night of fairy tales
The Simpleton. There lived, once upon a time, a man who was as rich as he could be, but as no happiness in this world is ever quite complete, he had only one son, who was such a simpleton that he could barely add 2 and 2 together. At last his father determined to put him up with his stupidity no longer, and giving him a purse full of gold, he sent him off to seek his fortune in foreign lands, mindful of the adage, "How much a fool that's sent to roam excels a fool that stays at home." Moscione was the youth's name, and mounted a horse and set out for Venice, hoping to find a ship there that could take him to Cairo. After he had ridden for some time, he saw a man standing at the foot of a poplar tree, and said to him, "What's your name, my friend? Where do you come from, and what can you do?" The man replied, "My name is Quick as Thought. I come from Freetown, and I can run like lightning." "I should like to see you," returned Moscione. "Wait a minute, then," said Quick as Thought, "and I will show you that I am speaking the truth." The words were hardly out of his mouth when a young doe ran right across the field as they were standing there. Quick as Thought let her run a short distance in order to give her a start. Then he pursued her so quickly and so lightly that you could not have tracked his footsteps in the field had been strewn with flour. At a few springs he had overtaken the doe, and had so impressed Moscione with his fleetness of foot that he begged Quick as Thought to go with him, promising at the same time to reward him handsomely. Quick as Thought agreed to the proposal, and they continued on their journey together. They had hardly gone a mile when they met a young man, and Moscione stopped and asked him, "What's your name, my friend? Where do you come from, and what can you do?" The man thus addressed answered promptly, "I'm called Hare's Ear, and I come from Curiosity Valley, and if I lay my ear on the ground without moving from the spot, I can hear everything that goes on in the world, the plots, the intrigues at court and cottage, all the plans of mice and men." "If that's the case," replied Moscione, "just tell me what's going on in my home at present." The youth laid his ear to the ground, and at once reported, "An old man is saying to his wife, 'Heaven be praised that we got rid of Moscione, for perhaps when he has been out in the world a little, he may gain some common sense and return home less of a fool than he was when he set out.'" "Enough, enough," cried Moscione. "You speak the truth, and I believe you. Come with us, and your fortune's made." The young man consented, and after they had gone about 10 miles, they met a third man, to whom Moscione said, "What's your name, my brave fellow, and where were you born, and what can you do?" The man replied, "I'm called Hit the Point. I come from the city of Perfect Aim. I draw my bow so exactly that I can shoot a pea off of a stone." "I should like to see you do it, if you've no objection," said Moscione. The man at once placed a pea on a stone, and, drawing his bow, he shot it in the middle with the greatest possible ease. When Moscione saw that he had spoken the truth, he immediately asked Hit the Point to join his party. After they had all traveled together for some days, they came upon a number of people who were digging a trench in the blazing sun. Moscione felt so sorry for them that he said, "My dear friends, how can you endure working so hard in the heat that could cook an egg in a minute?" But one of the workmen answered, "We're fresh as daisies, for we have a young man among us who blows on our backs like the west wind." "Well, let me see him," said Marcus One. The youth was called, and Moscione asked him, "What's your name, where do you come from, and what do you do?" He answered, "I'm called Blowblast. I come from Windtown, and with my mouth I can make any winds you please. If you wish a west wind, I can raise it for you in a second. If you prefer a north wind, I can blow these houses down before your eyes." "Seeing is believing,"
returned the curious Marscone. Blowblasts at once began to convince him the truth with his assertion. First he blew so softly that it seemed like a gentle breeze in the evening, and then he turned round and raised such a mighty storm that he blew down a whole row of oak trees. When Muskegon saw this, he was delighted and begged Blowblast to join his company. And as they went on their way, they met another man whom Muskegon addressed as usual. "What's your name? Where do you come from, and what do you do?" "I'm called Strongback. I come from Powerborough, and I possess such strength that I can take a mountain on my back, and it seems like a feather to me." "Well, if that's the case," said Muskegon, "you're a clever fellow, but I should like some proof of your strength." Then Strongback loaded himself with great boulders of rocks and trunks of trees, so that 100 wagons could not have taken away all he carried on his back. When Muskegon saw this, he prevailed on Strongback to join his troop, and they all continued their journey until they came to a country called Flowervale. Here there reigned a king whose only daughter ran as quickly as the wind, and so lightly that she could run over a field of young oats without bending a single blade. The king had given out a proclamation to anyone who could beat the princess in a race should have her to wife, but all that failed in the competition would lose their heads. As soon as Muskegon heard the royal proclamation, he hastened to the king and challenged the princess to a race with him. But on the morning appointed for the trial, he sent word to the king that he was not feeling well, and that he could not run himself. He would supply someone else to take his place. "It's just the same to me," said Cantilla, the princess. "Let anyone come forward that likes. I'm quite prepared to meet him." At the appointed time for the race, the whole place was crowded with people anxious to see the contest, and, punctual to the moment, quick as thought, and Cantilla, dressed in a short skirt and very lightly shod, appeared at the starting point. Then a silver trumpet sounded, and the two rivals started their race, looking for all the world like a greyhound chasing a hare. But Quick as Thought, true to his name, outran the princess, and when the goal was reached, all the people clapped their hands and shouted, "Long live the stranger!" Cantilla was much depressed by her defeat, but as the race had to be run a second time, she determined she would not be beaten again. Accordingly, she went home and sent Quick as Thought a magic ring, which prevented the person who wore it not only from running, but even from walking, and begged that he would wear it for her sake. Early next morning, the crowd assembled on the racecourse, and Cantilla and Quick as Thought began their trial afresh. The princess ran as quick as ever, but poor Quick as Thought looked like an overloaded donkey and could not go a step. Then Hit-a-Point, who heard about the princess's deception from Here's Ear, when he saw the danger his friend was in, seized his bow and shot the stone out of the ring Quick as Thought was wearing. In a moment, the youth's legs became free again, and in 5 bounds he had overtaken Cantilla and won the race. The king was much disgusted when he saw that he must acknowledge Muskegon as his future son-in-law, and summoned the wise men of his court to ask if there was no way out of the difficulty. The council at once decided that Cantilla was far too dainty a morsel for the mouth of such a traveling tinker, and advised the king to offer Muskegon a present of gold, which no doubt a beggar like him would prefer to all the wives in the world. The king was delighted at this suggestion, and calling Muskegon before him, he asked him what sum of money he would take instead of his promised bride. Muskegon first consulted with his friends, and then answered, "I demand as much gold and precious stones as my followers can carry away." The king thought he was being let off very easy, and produced coffers of gold, sacks of silver, and chests of precious stones. But the more Strongback was loaded with the treasure, the straighter he stood. At last the treasury was quite exhausted, and the king had to send his courtiers to his subjects to collect all the gold and silver that they possessed. But nothing was of any avail, and Strongback only asked for more. When the king's counselors saw the unexpected result of their advice, they said it would be more than foolish to let some strolling thieves take so much treasure out of the country, and urged the king to send a troop of soldiers after them to recover the gold and precious stones. So the king sent a body of armed men on foot and on horse to take back the treasure Strongback was carrying away with him. But Hairseer, who heard that the counselors had advised the king, told his companions just as the dust of the pursuers was visible on the horizon. No sooner had Blowblast taken to their danger than he raised up such a mighty wind that all the king's army was blown down like so many ninepins. And as they were quite unable to get up again, Mousquillon and his companions proceeded on their way, without further let or hindrance. As soon as they reached his home, Mousquillon divided his spoil with his companions, at which they were much delighted. He himself stayed with his father, who was obliged at last to acknowledge that his son was not quite the fool as he looked. Okay. I think we'll go ahead and take the break here, because I know I won't get the next story read quite as fast as I did those two. So I will see you in a few minutes. Is it safe? I didn't see the ads ever play. Switch doing weird stuff again. I did manage to get the post pen that has the book that I'm reading. So if you feel like getting a copy and reading it for yourself, by all means, you can go through my bookstore. Although I think it might be on back order right now. This next one's going to have a few interesting voices in it. And I'm sure you might have heard the same story under a different name. I'm going to double check to make sure it is. Oh yeah. This book has it listed as The Street Musicians. Most people would probably know it as the Brenhamtown Musicians. But anyway, our next story for this wonderful Friday night of fairy tales. The Street Musicians. A man once possessed a donkey which had served him faithfully for many years, but at last the poor beast grew old and feeble, and every day his work became more of a burden. He was no longer of any use, and his master made up his mind to shoot him. But when the donkey learnt his fate was in store for him, he determined not to die, but to run away to the nearest town, and there to become a street musician. When he had trotted along for some distance, he came upon a greyhound lying in the road and panting for dear life. "Here, brother," said the donkey, "what's the matter with you? You look rather tired." "Oh, replied the dog, "but because I'm getting old and growing weaker every day, I cannot go out hunting any longer. My master wanted to poison me, and as life is still sweet, I have taken leave of him, but how am I to earn my own livelihood when I haven't a notion?" "Well," said the donkey, "I am on my way to the nearest big town, where I will mean to become a street musician. Why don't you take up music as a profession and come along with me? I'll play the flute, and you can play the kettle drum." The greyhound was quite pleased at the idea, and the two set off together. When they had gone a short distance, they met a cat with a face as long as 3 rainy days. "Now, what happened to upset your happiness, friend Puss?" inquired the donkey. "It's impossible to look cheerful when one feels depressed," answered the cat. "I am well up in my years now, and have lost most my teeth. Consequently, I prefer sitting in front of the fire to catching mice. So my old mistress wanted to drown me. I have no wish to die yet, so I ran away from her. But good advice is expensive, and I don't know where I am to go to, or what I am to do." "Come to the nearest town with us," said the donkey, "and try for yourself as a street musician. I know what sweet music you make at night. You are sure to be a success." The cat was delighted with the donkey's proposal, and they all continued their journey together. In a short time they came to a courtyard of an inn, where they found a cock crowing lustily. "What in the world's the matter with you?" asked the donkey. "The noise you are making is enough to break the drums of our ears."
"I am only prophesying good weather," said the cock, "for tomorrow is a feast day, and just because it's a holiday, a number of people are expected at the inn. The landlady has given orders for my neck to be wrung tonight, so I may as well be made into soup for tomorrow's dinner."
"I'll tell you what, Redcap," said the donkey. "You had much better come with us to the nearest town. You have a good voice, and you could join a street band we're getting up." The cock was much pleased with the idea, and the party proceeded on their way. But the nearest big town was a long way off, and it took them more than a day to reach it. In the evening they came to a wood, and they made up their minds to go no further, but to spend the night there. The donkey and the greyhound lay beneath a big tree, and the cat and the cock got up into the branches, the cock flying right up to the topmost twig, where he thought he would be safe from all danger. Before he went to sleep, he looked round 4 points of the compass, and saw a little spark burning in the distance. He called out to his companions that he was sure there must be a house not far off, for he could see a light shining. When he heard this, the donkey said at once, "Then we must go up and look for the house, for this is very poor shelter." And the greyhound added, "Yes, I think we'd better go for a few bones or a scrap or two of meat." So they set out for the spot where the light was to be seen shining faintly in the distance. But the nearer they approached, the brighter it grew, till at last they came to a brilliantly lighted house. The donkey, being the biggest of the party, went to the window and looked in.
"Well, Greyhead, what do you see?"
asked the cock. "I see a covered table," replied the donkey, "with excellent food and drink, and several robbers are sitting around it, enjoying themselves highly."
"I wish we were doing the same,"
said the cock. "So do I," answered the donkey. "Can't we think of a plan for turning out the robbers and taking possession of the house for ourselves?" So they consulted together what they were to do, and at last they arranged that the donkey should stand at the window with his 4 feet on the sill, that the greyhound should get on his back, the cat on the dog's shoulders, and the cock on the cat's head. When they had grouped themselves in this way, at any given signal, they all began their different forms of music. The donkey brayed, the dog barked, the cat meowed, and the cock crowed. Then they all scrambled through the window in the room, breaking the glass into 1,000 pieces as they did so. The robbers were so startled by the dreadful noise and thinking that some evil spirits at least were entering the house, they rushed into the woods, their hair standing on end with terror. The 4 companions, delighted with the success of their trick, sat down at the table and ate and drank all the food and wine that the robbers had left behind them. When they had finished their meal, they put out the lights, and each animal chose a suitable sleeping place. The donkey lay down in the courtyard outside the house, the dog behind the door, the cat in front of the fire, and the cock flew up on a high shelf, and as they were all tired after their long day, they soon went to sleep. Shortly after midnight, when the robbers saw that no light was burning in the house and that all seemed quiet, the captain of the band said, "We were fools to let ourselves be so easily frightened away." And turning to one of his men, he ordered him to go and see if all was safe. The man found everything in silence and darkness, and going to the kitchen, he thought he had better strike a light. He took a match, and mistaking the fiery eyes for the cat for two glowing coals, tried to strike the light of the match with them. But the cat didn't see the joke, and sprang at his face, spitting and scratching him with the most vigorous manner. The man was terrified out of his life and tried to run out the back door, but stumbled over the greyhound, which bit him in the leg. Yelling with pain, he ran across the courtyard, only to receive a kick from the donkey's hind leg as he passed near him. In the meantime, the cock had been roused from his slumbers, and feeling very cheerful, he called out from the shelf where he was perched, "Kikeri!" Then the robber hastened back to his captain and said, "Sir, there's a dreadful witch in the house who spat at me and scratched my face with her long fingers. Before the door there stands a man with a long knife who cut my leg severely. In the courtyard lies a black monster who fell upon me with a huge wooden club. And that is not all, for spitting on the roof like a judge, the rascal cried out, 'Bring the rascal to me!' And so I fled for my dear life." After this, the robbers dared not venture into the house again, and they abandoned it forever. But the Forest Street musicians were so delighted with their new lodgings that they determined to take up their abode in the robber's house, and, for all I know to the contrary, they may still be living there to this day. Did I blast out the microphone doing that? Because it sounded loud to me, but it's only reading me peeking in the yellow with my normal speak, so I guess rooster crowing would be a little bit louder. Yeah, doing the donkey and the old dog
And the cat. And the rooster.
and, of course, the robbers. Yeah. That one's been like the Birmingham players, and this one the traveling musicians. It just never mentioned the name of the town in the story. Now I am leaning back in my chair with a book almost between me and the microphone. So if it's too loud, I guess I'm doing my job right. Anyway. Oh. What is an Arctobax? Anyway. Yeah, this next one is another story that comes under several different stories names. But for this particular edition of Friday Night Fairy Tales, the next story, The Twin Brothers. There was once a fisherman who had plenty of money, but no children. One day an old woman came to his wife and said,
What use is all this prosperity to you if you have no children?
It's God's will, answered the fisherman's wife.
Nay, my child, it's not God's will, but the fault of your husband. For if he had caught a little goldfish, he could surely have children. Tonight when he comes home, tell him he must go back and catch the little fish. He must cut it into 6 pieces. One of those you must eat, and your husband the second, as soon as you have 2 children. The 3rd piece you must give to the dog, and she will have 2 puppies. The 4th piece you must give to the mare, and she will have 2 foals. The 5th piece bury in the right of the house. and the 6 to the left. 2 cypress trees will spring up there.
When the fisherman came home that evening, his wife told him all the old woman had advised, and he promised to bring home the little gold fish. Next morning, therefore, he went very early to the water and caught the little fish. Then they did as the old woman had ordered, and in due time the fisherman's wife had 2 sons, so like each other that no one could tell the difference. The dog had 2 puppies exactly alike. The mayor had the 2 foals, and on each side of the front door there sprang up the 2 cypress trees, precisely similar. When the 2 boys were grown up, they were not content to remain at home, though they had wealth and plenty, but they wished to go out to the world and make a name for themselves. Their father would not allow them to both go at once. They were the only children he had. He said, "First one shall travel, and when he is back, then the other may go." So the first one took his horse and his dog, and went saying to his brother, "So long as the cypress trees are green, that is a sign that I am alive and well. But if one begins to wither, then make haste and come to me." And so he went forth into the world. One day he stopped at the house of an old woman, and as the evening sat before the door, he perceived in front of him a castle standing on the hill. He asked the old woman to whom it belonged, and her answer was,
"My son, it is a castle of the fairest in the land."
"And I am come here to woo her."
"That, my son, many have thought to do, and lost their lives in the attempt, for she has cut off the heads and stuck them on the posts you see standing there."
"And the same she will do to me, or else I shall be victor, for tomorrow I go there to court her." Then he took a zither and played upon it so beautifully that no one in the land had ever heard the like, and the princess herself came to the window to listen. The next morning the fairest in the land sent for the old woman and asked her, "Who is that lives with you and plays the zither so well?"
"It's a stranger, princess, who arrived yesterday evening," answered the old woman.
And the princess then commanded that the stranger should be brought to her. When he appeared before the princess, she questioned him about his home and his family, and about this and that, and confessed at length that it was his zither playing that gave her such pleasure, and that she would take him for her husband. The stranger replied that it was with that intent that he had come. The princess then said, "Now you must go to see my father and tell him you desire to have me as a wife, and when he has put the 3 problems before you, then come back and tell me." The stranger then went straight to the king and told him he wished to wed his daughter. And the king answered, "I shall be well pleased, provided you can do what I impose upon you. If not, you will lose your head. Now listen, out there on the ground there lies a thick log, which measures more than 2 fathoms. If you can cleave it in 2 with one stroke of your sword, I will give you my daughter to wife. If you fail, then it will cost you your head." Then the stranger withdrew and returned to the house of the old woman, sorely distressed, for he could believe nothing but the next day he must atone to the king with his head. And so full was he of the idea of how to set about cleaving the log, he forgot even his zither. In the evening came the princess to the window to listen to his playing, and behold, all was still. Then she called to him, "Why are you so cast down this evening, that you did not play on your zither?" And he told her his trouble. But she laughed at it and called to him, "And you must grieve over that? Bring quickly your zither and play something for my amusement, and early tomorrow come to me." Then the stranger took his zither and played the whole evening for the amusement of the princess. The next morning she took a hair from her locks and gave it to him, saying, "Take this hair and wind it around your sword, and then you will be able to cleave the log in two." Then the stranger went forth, and with one blow cleft the log in two. But the king said, "I will impose another task upon you before you can wed my daughter." "Speak on," said the stranger. "Listen, then," answered the king. "You must mount a horse and ride 3 miles at full gallop, holding in each hand a goblet full of water. If you spill no drop, then I shall give you my daughter to wife. But if you do not succeed, then I shall take your life." Then the stranger returned to the house of the old woman, and again he was so troubled that he forgot his zither. In the evening the princess came to the window as before to listen to the music, but again all was still, and she called to him, "What is the matter? You do not play your zither." Then he related all that the king had ordered him to do, and the princess answered, "Do not let yourself be disturbed. Only play now, and come to me tomorrow morning." Then next morning he went to her, and she gave him her ring, saying, "Throw this ring into the water, and it will immediately freeze, so that you will not spill any." The stranger did as the princess bade him, and carried the water all the way. Then the king said, "Now I will give you a third task, and this shall be the last. I have a slave who will fight with you tomorrow, and if you conquer, you shall wed my daughter." The stranger returned, full of joy, to the house of the old woman, and that evening was so merry that the princess called to him, "You seem very cheerful this evening. What has my father told you that makes you so glad?" He answered, "Your father told me that tomorrow I must fight his slave. He is only another man like myself. I hope to subdue him and gain the contest." But the princess answered, "This is the hardest of all. I myself am the slave, for I swallow a drink that changes me into a man of unconquerable strength. Go tomorrow morning to the market, buy 12 buffalo hides and wrap them around your horse. Fasten this cloth around you, and when I am let loose upon you tomorrow, show it to me, that I may hold myself back and may not kill you. Then you will fight me. You must try to hit my horse between the eyes, for when you have killed it, you have conquered me." Next morning, therefore, he went to the market and bought the 12 buffalo hides, which he wrapped around his horse. Then he began to fight with the slave, and when the combat was already lasted a long time, the 11 hides were torn. Then the stranger hit the slave's horse between the eyes, so that it fell dead, and the strong man was defeated. Then said the king, "Because you have solved the 3 problems, I take you for my son-in-law." But the stranger answered, "I have some business to conclude first. In 14 days I will return and bring my bride home." So he arose and went into another country, where he came to a great town, and alighted to the house of an old woman. When he had had supper, he begged her for some water to drink, but she answered, "My son, I have no water. A giant has taken possession of the spring and only lets us draw from it once a year, when we bring him a maiden. He eats her up and then lets us draw water. Just now it is the lot of the king's daughter, for tomorrow she will be led forth." The next day, accordingly, the princess was led forth to the spring, and bound there with a golden chain. After all the people went away, she was left alone. When they had gone, the stranger went to the maiden and asked her what ailed her that she lamented so much, and she answered that the reason was because the giant would come to eat her up. Then the stranger promised that he would set her free if she would take him for her husband, and the princess joyfully consented. When the giant appeared, the stranger set his dog at him, and it took him by the throat and throttled him until he died. And so the princess was free. Now, when the king heard of it, he gladly consented to the marriage, and the wedding took place with great rejoicings. The young bridegroom abode at the palace 101 weeks. Then he began to find it too dull and desired to go out hunting. The king would fain have prevented it, but he could not succeed. Then he begged his son-in-law at least to take sufficient escort with him, but this too the young man evaded, and took only his horse and his dog. He had ridden already a long way when he saw in the distance a hut, and rode straight towards it in order to get some water to drink. There he found an old woman from whom he begged the water. She answered the first that he should allow her to beat his dog with a little wand, that it might not bite her while she fetched the water. The hunter consented, and as soon as she had touched the dog with her wand, it immediately turned into stone. Thereupon she touched the hunter and also his horse, and both turned to stone. As soon as this happened, the cypress trees in front of his father's house began to wither. And when the older brother saw this, he immediately set out in search of his twin. He came first to the town where his brother had slain the giant, and where the fate led him to the same old woman where his brother had lodged. When she saw him, she took him for his twin brother, and said to him,
"Do not take it amiss of me, my son. I did not come to wish you joy on your marriage with the king's daughter."
The stranger perceived what mistake she had made, but only said that "It does not matter, old woman," and rode on, without further speech, to the king's palace, where the king and the princess both took him for his twin brother, and called out, "Why have you tarried away so long?
We thought something evil had befallen you."
When night came, he slept with the princess, who still believed him to be her husband, and laid his sword between them. When morning came, he rose early and went out to hunt. Fate led him by the same way his brother had taken, and from a distance he saw him and knew that he was turned to stone. Then he entered the hut and ordered the old woman to disenchant his brother, but she answered,
"Let me first touch your dog with my wand, then I will free your brother."
He ordered the dog, however, to take hold of her and bite her up until she cried out,
"Tell your dog to let me go, and I will set your brother free."
But he only answered, "Tell me the magic words that I may disenchant him myself." And as she would not, he ordered his dog to bite up to her hip. The old woman cried out,
"I have two wands. The green one will turn to stone, the red one will bring back to life."
So the hunter took the red wand and disenchanted his brother, and also his brother's horse and his dog, and ordered his dog to eat the old woman up altogether. While the brothers went on their way back to the castle of the king, the one brother related to the other how the cypress tree had all but dried up once it withered, and how he had immediately set out in search of his twin, and how he had come to the castle of his father-in-law and had claimed the princess as his wife. But the other brother became furious on hearing this, and smote him over the forehead until he died, and returned alone to the house of his father-in-law. When night came and he was in bed, the princess asked him,
"What was the matter with you last night? You never spoke a word to me."
Then he cried out, "That was not me, but my brother, and I have slain him because he told me by the way that he had claimed you for his wife."
"Do you know the place where you slew him?" asked the princess. "And can you find the body?"
"I know the place exactly."
"Then tomorrow we shall ride there,"
said the princess. Next morning, accordingly, they set out together, and when they came to the place, the princess drew forth a small bottle that she had brought with her, and sprinkled the body with some drops of the water, so that immediately he came alive. When he stood up, his brother said to him, "Forgive me, dear brother, that I slew you in anger." They embraced and went together to the fairest of the land, whom the unmarried brother took to wife. Then the brothers brought their parents to live with them, and dwelt together in joy and happiness.
Fuck yeah!
So, how was the Final Fantasy? The story slowed down. Yeah, that happens. Went from hot Mexican soap opera romance to Dancing with Kids. Yeah, that would be a little weird. I always wonder how many continuations Final Fantasy series can have, because it's not exactly final. Floating babies telling you to dance and kill trees. Yeah, that would be weird. I'd be leery about floating babies in the first place, but killing trees? The fairies? Trying to think of how many stories I have left in this book. Oh, yep, blanket time. Let's see. There are only 5 stories left in this book. This next one, I know I'm going to mess up some pronunciations. Let's see, where's this one from? It didn't say. Oh, it's Italian. Okay. That'll explain it. So many fun Italian names to pronounce. Anyway, likely our last story for the night Canatella. There was once upon a time a king who reigned over a country called Belopuoho. He was very rich and powerful and had everything in the world he could desire, except a child. But at last, after he had been married for many years and was quite an old man, his wife Renzola presented him with a fine daughter, whom they called Canatella. She grew up into a beautiful girl and was tall and straight as a young fir tree. When she was 18 years old, her father called her to him and said, "You are now old, my daughter, to marry and settle down. But as I love you more than anything else in the world and desire nothing but your happiness, I am determined to leave the choice of a husband to yourself. Choose a man after your own heart, and you are sure to satisfy me." Canatella thanked her father very much for his kindness and consideration, but told him that she had not the slightest wish to marry, and was quite determined to remain single. The king, who felt himself growing old and feeble, and longed to see an heir to the throne before he died, was very unhappy at her words, and begged her earnestly not to disappoint him. When Canatella saw that the king had his heart set on her marriage, she said, "Very well, dear father, I will marry to please you, for I do not wish to appear ungrateful for all your love and kindness. But you must find me a husband handsomer, cleverer, and more charming than anyone else in the world." The king was overjoyed by her words, and from early in the morning till late at night he sat by the window and carefully looked over at all the passers-by, in hopes of finding a son-in-law among them. One day, seeing a very good-looking man crossing the street, the king called his daughter and said, "Come quickly, dear Canatella, and look at this man, for I think he might suit you as a husband." They called the young man into the palace and set a sumptuous feast before him, with every sort of delicacy you can imagine. In the middle of the meal, the youth let an almond fall out of his mouth, which, however, he picked up again very quickly and hid under the tablecloth. When the feast was over, the stranger went away, and the king asked Canatella, "Well, what do you think of the youth?" "I think he is a clumsy wretch," replied Canatella. "Fancy a man of his age letting an almond fall out of his mouth." When the king heard her answer, he returned to his watch at the window, and shortly afterwards a very handsome young man passed by. The king instantly called his daughter to come and see what she thought of the newcomer. "Call him in," said Canatella, "that we may see him close." Another splendid feast was prepared, and when the stranger had eaten and drunk as much as he was able, and had taken his departure, the king asked Canatella how she liked him. "Not at all," replied his daughter. "What could we do with a man who requires at least 2 servants to help him on with his cloak, because he is too awkward to put it on himself properly?" "If that's all you have against him," said the king, "I see how the land lies. You are determined not to have a husband at all, but marry someone you shall, for I do not mean my name and house to die out." "Very well, my dear parents," said Canatella. "I must tell you at once that you had better not count upon me, for I never mean to marry unless I can find a man with a gold head and gold teeth." The king was very angry at finding his daughter so obstinate, but as he always gave the girl her own way in everything, he issued a proclamation to the effect that any man with a gold head and gold teeth might come forward to claim the princess as his bride, and the kingdom of Belopuoho as a wedding gift. Now, the king had a deadly enemy called Schiravante, who was a very powerful magician. No sooner had this man heard the proclamation that he summoned his attendant spirits and commanded them to gild his head and his teeth. The spirits said at first that the task was beyond their powers, and suggested that a pair of gold horns attached to his forehead would be easier to make and more comfortable to wear. But Scioravante would not allow compromise, and insisted on having his head and teeth made of the finest gold. And when it was fixed on his shoulders, he went for a stroll in front of the palace. And the king, seeing the very man he was in search of, called his daughter and said, "Just look out the window and you will find exactly what you want." Then Scioravante was hurrying past, and the king shouted out to him, "Just wait a minute, brother, and don't be in such a desperate haste. If you will step in here, you shall have my daughter for a wife. I will send attendants with her, and as many horses and servants as you wish." "1,000 thanks," returned Scioravante. "I shall be delighted to marry your daughter, but it is quite unnecessary to send anyone to accompany her. Give me a horse, and I will carry the princess in front of my saddle, and will bring her to my own kingdom, where there is no lack of courtiers or servants, or indeed of anything your daughter can desire." At first, the king was very much against Cannatella's departing in this fashion, but finally Scioravante got his way, and placing the princess before him on his horse, he set out for his own country. Towards evening he dismounted, and entered a stable. He placed Cannatella in the same stall as his horse, and said to her, "Now listen to what I have to say. I am going to my home now, and that is 7 years' journey from here. You must wait for me in this stable, and never move from the spot, or let yourself be seen by any living soul. If you disobey my commands, it will be the worse for you." The princess answered meekly, "Sir, I am your servant, and will do exactly as you bid me, but I should like to know what I am to live on till you come back." "You can take whatever the horses leave," was Scioravante's reply. When the magician had left, Cannatella felt very miserable, and bitterly cursed the day that she was born. She spent all her time weeping and bemoaning the cruel fate that had driven her from a palace into a stable, from soft down cushions to a bed of straw, and from dainties of her father's table to the food the horses left. She led this wretched life for a few months, and during that time she never saw who fed and watered the horses, for it was all done by invisible hands. One day, when she was more than unusually unhappy, she perceived a little crack in the wall through which she could see a beautiful garden with all manner of delicious fruits and flowers growing in it. The sight and smell of such delicacies were too much for poor Cannatella, and she said to herself, "I must slip quietly out and pick a few oranges and grapes. I don't care what happens. Who is there to tell my husband what I do? And even if he should hear of my disobedience, he cannot make my life more miserable than it is already." So she slipped out and refreshed her poor, starved body with the fruit plucked from the garden. But a short time afterwards her husband returned unexpectedly, and one of the horses instantly told him that Cannatella had gone into the garden in his absence and had stolen oranges and grapes. Scioravante was furious when he heard this, and seizing a huge knife from his pocket, he threatened to kill his wife for her disobedience. But Cannatella threw herself at his feet and implored him to spare her life, saying that hunger drove even the wolf from the wood. At last she succeeded in so far softening her husband's heart that he said, "I forgive you this time and spare your life, but do not disobey me again. And I hear, on my return, that you have much moved out of the stall. I will certainly kill you. So beware, for I am going away once more and shall be absent for 7 years." With these words, he took his departure, and Cannetella burst into a flood of tears, and wringing her hands, she moaned, "Why was I ever born such a hard fate? Oh, father, how miserable you have made your poor daughter! But why should I blame my father, for I have only myself to thank for all my sufferings. I got the cursed head of gold, and it has brought me all the misery on me. I am indeed punished for not doing as my father wished." When a year had gone by, it chanced one day that the king's cooper passed the stables where Cannetella was kept prisoner. She recognized the man and called him to come in. At first he did not know the poor princess, and could not make out who it was that called him by name. But when he heard Cannetella's tale of woe, he hid her in a big empty barrel he had with him, partly because he was sorry for the poor girl, and even more, because he wished to gain the king's favor. Then he slung the barrel on the mule's back, and in this way the princess was carried to her own home. They arrived in the palace about 4 o'clock in the morning, and the cooper knocked loudly at the door. When the servants came in haste and saw only the cooper standing at the gate, they were very indignant and scolded him soundly for coming at such an hour and waking them all out of their deep sleep. The king, hearing the noise and the cause of it, sent for the cooper, for he felt certain the man has to have some important business and to come and disturb the whole palace at such an early hour. The cooper asked permission to unload his mule, and Cannetella crept out of the barrel. At first the king refused to believe that it was really his daughter, for she had changed so terribly in a few years, and had grown so thin and pale that it was pitiful to see her. At last the princess showed her father a mole she had on her right arm, and then he saw that the poor girl was indeed the long-lost Cannetella. He kissed her 1,000 times and instantly had the choicest food and drink set before her. After she had satisfied her hunger, the king said to her, "Who would have thought, my poor daughter, to have found you in such a state? What, may I ask, has brought you to this pass?" Cannetella replied, "The wicked men with the gold head and teeth treated me worse than a dog, and many a time since I left you I've longed to die. But I couldn't tell you all that I've suffered, for you would never believe me. It is enough that I am here once more with you, and I shall never leave you again, for I should rather be a slave in your house than a queen in any other." In the meantime, Sciravante had returned to the stables, and one of the horses told him that Cannetella had been taken away by a cooper in a barrel. When the wicked magician heard this, he was beside himself with rage, and hastened to the kingdom of Beliopujo. He went straight to the old woman who lived exactly opposite the royal palace, and said to her, "If you will let me see the king's daughter, I will give you whatever reward you would like to ask for." The woman demanded 100 ducats of gold, and Sciravante counted them out of his purse and gave them to her without a murmur. Then the old woman led him to the roof of the house, where he could see Cannetella combing out her long hair in a room on the top story of the palace. The princess happened to look out the window, and when she saw her husband gazing at her, she got such a fright that she flew downstairs to the king and said, "My lord and father, unless you shut me up instantly in a room with 7 iron doors, I am lost." "If that's all," said the king, "it shall be done at once." And he gave orders to the doors to be closed on the spot.
When Scioravante saw this, he returned to the old woman and said, "I will give you whatever you'd like if you will go into the palace and hide under the princess's bed and slip this little piece of paper beneath her pillow, saying as you do, 'May everyone in the palace except the princess fall into a sound sleep.'" The old woman demanded another 100 golden ducats, and then proceeded to carry out the magician's wishes. No sooner had she slipped a piece of paper under Cannatella's pillows than all the people in the palace fell deep asleep, and only the princess remained awake. Then Scioravante hurried to the 7 doors and opened them one after the other. Cannatella screamed in terror when she saw her husband, but no one came to help her, for all in the palace lay as if they were dead. The magician seized her in the bed on which she lay and was going to carry her off with a piece, when the little piece of paper which the woman had placed under her pillow fell to the floor. In an instant, all the people in the palace woke up, as Cannatella was still screaming for help. They rushed to her rescue. They seized Scioravante and put him to death, so he was caught in the trap which he had laid for the princess, and, as is often so in the case of this world, the biter himself was bit. Tempted to read another one. How long is this one? The next one's... But I want to save the last 4 stories for next week. Ouch. So, let's see who might be on that we can raid. Let's see, do we want to go see some art? We want to see more writing and reading and writing, one or the other. See if there's actually any writers or readers on. Normally Friday night's not one of the nights to do anything. Yep. I thought I just saw a name I recognized. Or if anyone in chat has any suggestions. I don't see any writers or readers that I know on. At least none that are actually doing writing and reading right now.
hold up. What's this? Someone else doing fairy tales. I don't know. Do you want to hear some more Brothers Grimm fairy tales? Through, apparently being read by a demon. This guy has like 5 times as many followers as I do. I don't know, everyone have any suggestions? I think we may just raid Dusk. I will hopefully see you all next time, and I hope you have a wonderful night. So let's go watch some chill art. Have a good night, everyone. Enjoy my closing theme.
In the quiet of the evening, where shadows softly play, a fairy tale wolf sheds his skin, gently drifting away, with a twinkle in his eye and a heart full of dreams. He waits for the Friday night glow, where the magic redeems. Oh, the wolf in the moonlight, he's found his true call, reading tales of wonder for one and for all. In a world of stars dancing, his spirit takes flight, with stories of beauty under the starlit night.